talk about basic income and how it's being intersected with cryptocurrencies. I'm talking with two moderators of the subreddit on basic income, with Ed and Scott, and they're going to break down this concept with us, and not only what it's about, the different varying philosophies that are going on here, but how cryptocurrency can actually implement this kind of idea. So let's go with some introductions. We'll start with you first, Ed.
My name's Ed. My handle is Edzillion, and I'm a moderator of the Irish basic income subreddit and the basic income subreddit and the Irish subreddit as well, although I don't use that to promote basic income. I'm also a member of Basic Income Ireland, which is one of the older national basic income groups, and dating from the early 80s. And yeah, I'm generally, I have given up all political affiliations other than towards implementing a basic income.
Okay, and let's go with you, Scott.
Hi, yeah, I'm Scott Santons, and also am a mod of the Basic Income subreddit, and I'm also a mod of the Fair Share subreddit as well, which is a kind of a testing implementation of a universal income through Bitcoin sharing, basically. And I'm also a basic income advocate. I have my blog, scottsantons.com, and I write articles about it.
Okay. Well, I have this like kind of a theorem that seems to be going on primarily beginning within the 21st century, where there's a lot of what I call sci-fi dreams. The dreams of like having jetpacks and robots and universal health, digital monies, these different concepts and philosophies of governments that people have been talking about for centuries, either by philosophies, poems, or books. You see, a lot of times you see these concepts in sci-fi books, and it seems now we're at the cusp where a lot of this is being implemented. I mean, you have Elon Musk with the battery. You have a lot of effort to. You have a lot of automation going on with different types of robots, and you have Bitcoin, which has launched the whole digital currencies that are being implemented, and then you have basic income, where people are now talking about this at such
Well, more so than ever before, that's for sure.
Yes, some of it has to do with the climate change, automation of jobs, the global collapse, and it also seems that people are more open to this concept than ever before.
Yeah, I really, one of the major precursors for this, I believe, is the collapse of the housing market and what happened with that worldwide. I mean, basically, we entered a recession and we shed a lot of jobs and stuff. And this is one of those. It's a great example of what happens once you shed jobs. Is that with technology, is that you don't actually need to bring them back. Like, you realize that you're fine without them. It reminds me of like with Applebee's and the tablets, when that was big news last year, and they brought out the tablet and they're like, don't worry, we're not going to eliminate any jobs. It's just gonna help people do more. It's going to help customer service, and it's all going to be great. And so, but the thing about this is they don't say this because they can't say it. But let's say you've got a restaurant and you've got a staff of, let's just say 10, and you get your tablets. And sure enough, they can do more with less because of the tablets. So then they don't fire anybody. They still got 10 employees. But then, let's say a couple employees quit, because they go on to other things. So then you've got 8 employees. And then with the tablets, you're like, well, actually, we're actually doing kind of fine with this. We don't actually need to hire 2 more employees back. So they didn't actually get rid of anybody. They didn't downsize. But once they actually naturally shrank, they realized that they worked just fine. And I think that's what happened on the international level is after that crash, you just had all these companies realizing that they didn't actually have to hire people back in order to be as profitable as they are, and they just were able to increase their profits as is without having to hire back labor.
Yeah, and just to comment, if I could, on why I think basic income has become such an issue of the moment. Are obviously these growing, like automation isn't something that has suddenly appeared. And I think I was having an interesting discussion with an economist a while ago, and I was at pains to point out to him that the talk of automation taking over jobs started in the 70s. When the personal computer was first, really coming into view. There was all this talk about, well, if we have printers instead of a typing pool, if we have photocopiers, all these kind of little things, surely that'll put people out of work. And kind of in the same process Scott is talking about, companies don't immediately turn around and go, look, this is the new efficiency, so we must fire everybody. I mean, a lot of companies, a huge amount of people are hired by small to medium enterprises, and they know their bosses. Their bosses aren't going to turn around and go, I'm immediately now going to fire half my staff. That's not going to happen.
Yeah.
They know these people personally. But over time, you have this slow, growth of things that can be done by computer and that are acceptedly socially to be done by computer. For example, you see that the things in supermarkets, they have these automated queues, automated machines instead of checkout people. And a lot of people will say, I'll hear them say, I won't go to them because I care about preserving jobs. And I think that could only last so long. I mean, already you don't really hear that, and people just accept the new paradigm and go with it. And just to say, whilst you have automation and it's becoming more obvious now, the start of the basic income movement initially was more about social justice and talking about how if so many of the things in society are dependent on having wealth, having income, having currency to be able to spend, because when you spend more on, let's say, a lawyer, you tend to get a better outcome. Then we need to be able to have a system in which we can spread the wealth more fairly. Otherwise, people don't really have the freedom that we say that we're giving them on our Bill of Rights or whatever it is. And I think what's interesting is that I joined the Basic Income Ireland meeting, group on the same night. The first meeting I went, there was another guy who happened to work on Facebook, and you could really clearly see the meeting of these two kind of streams of basic income. It was me and Jan, the other guy that joined, were a lot younger, and we were kind of more motivated by reading about basic income through the Futurist subreddit, for example. And I think basic income is a wonderful thing where it can have all these different streams under the same tent, and we can agree on basically everything. There's minor discussions about things, but because it's a simple enough idea, there isn't this huge amount of doctrinary debate, even though we're motivated by different reasons.
Yes, and what I found very amazing about basic income, because I've read about it off and on over the years, because very different types of political ideology bring it up, different philosophers and economic people bring it up. But one of the basic principles of basic income is, each individual will have what is the basic minimum requirement to sustain themselves, And if you think about it, it's, having a roof over your head, clothes on your back, food in your belly, and maybe just a little extra to survive and live within a society. And there's no requirement. All you have to do is, in essence, is exist, which is very different from the welfare and social states that pretty much all nations have now.
Yeah, and I believe Hayek actually really described this well. Like, if you are able to read Hayek's actual words, he makes the difference, between saying, okay, well, there's a large difference between equal opportunity and equal outcomes. There's a difference between supplying everybody, the median income, and supplying everybody the same minimum income. And he's saying that we're, especially as the future progresses, we'll be able to afford more and more, and it only makes sense to provide someone an equal minimum so that to provide everybody that same opportunity. It's not to say that you're guaranteed a wonderful life. It's just saying that, hey, everybody actually needs to be able to eat and to be able to sleep indoors and to be able to wear clothes and to stay alive in order to accomplish all these other things. Like, everybody should at least have that minimum starting point. Another way to look at this is it's just, there's a lot of analogies you can make to the game of Monopoly. But I like to think, so imagine starting the game of Monopoly and you don't get any money to start. It's just, all right, we'll roll the dice. And it's like, well, I don't have anything. Like, how am I supposed to actually engage in the game? How am I supposed to, buy property or, pay these fees or anything? How am I supposed to do this? And then, like, the way we do it is like, well, you might be able to get a loan from the bank, and, you might be able to get a job, and then they call that this idea of fairness or something, and it's like, well, it doesn't make any sense, because if you want to actually make it fair and you want to make the game work, then you actually give somebody something to start with, and then they can actually go around the board and interact with the economy and become part of everything that they wouldn't be able to do otherwise. So we just have to make sure to give people just a starting amount, and so they can actually do all the things that they want to do. And that until we do that, the economy just doesn't work as well as it could, and it's actually focused more towards those who do have the resources. So this is why you're seeing the economy and the democracy work towards those at the top, because they're the ones with all the access to resources. And we have to make sure that everybody has a minimum access to resources so that we can actually get this game working correctly.
I want to add a little bit onto that, because it also, one of the things that intrigued me, because this could be coming from a very futuristic and sci-fi principle, is it's kind of very kind of Star Trek-ish, in the sense that all the basic minimum requirements have been fulfilled, and that individual is capable of pursuing whatever it is they seek to pursue. I think one of the episodes, Picard was like, you just improve and better yourself. And I think personally, just seeing how, the global collapse of the economy, and how if you don't have that stressor of knowing where your next meal is, or how you're going to pay for your mortgage, how that pressure on individuals is such a relief, because you have to think about how stress is such a key component of the decline of an individual's health. I mean, stress is the reason why people have, heart attacks, they eat bad, maybe they're more susceptible to get cancer earlier than maybe they would have had, genetic-wise, because they're under such stress. And when you remove that, what you've done is you basically have allowed the individual to start at a place where, okay, I can do this and that, because my basic essentials are covered. And if I want to start my own business, or if I want to, be a poet or an artist, or if I want to be a doctor or go to school, I don't have to worry about these things. All I have to do is try to figure out the way to achieve these other things.
Yeah, just to speak to that, I think it's interesting how the way things are organized at the moment. It seems like, well, I live in the EU and we have these austerity policies.
Yes.
And, I think it's an absolute indictment on the current the study of economics and economists at large, that they don't constantly talk about poverty. It's not the most exciting subject, but you just, in that kind of Star Trek analogy, it shouldn't be Star Trek, because any study that you care to read, and there's more and more studies coming out, and in fact there was pilot programs, basic income, done in Canada, in a place in Manitoba called Dauphin. And and these things keep coming up, which is that if you can design an environment in which a child can grow up where they have the smallest amount of stress about money and food and these basic life essentials, the more likely they are to become a valid, I don't mean to say valid, a useful member of society, and contribute. And yet, recently in Ireland, we've gone through this whole public debate about water charges. They want to bring in water charges, which I personally think is a step towards privatization, but there's a debate about that. But what you don't really hear talked about in this long debate is the mind space that it takes up. And to me, it's interesting that people don't think about the fact that there are problems with wastage if you give people water for free at the point of usage. You take it out of general taxation. Maybe people will use more, but aren't we trying to create a society in which people can think about the greater things, that like we almost have these series of brains in jars that are perfectly fed and perfectly facilitated, so that they can just be free to think up the greater solutions? Because after all innovation the economy is really made up of ideas and people.
And I also think it's important to point out, not only when we're talking about the ability to get rid of poverty, but just this idea that if you cover everybody's, if you allow access to the resources, if you allow access to food and rent and water and all these things through money, because money is what unlocks access to these resources. But if you do that, then you suddenly you don't have to spend all your money on this stuff anymore, because there's so many people in the economy right now where they get your paycheck and you just spend it on food and rent. There's not a whole lot of other stuff you can spend on. And
Yeah.
so a large part of the economy is just focused on your basic needs, and they're locked out of the rest of the economy. And so it makes economic sense to just get rid of the worry about the bottom stuff, and because everybody needs it anyways. So just make sure people have access to that, and then people can actually spend their money, especially from their incomes and whatever they do. They can spend their money on everything more than that, and that's how you drive an economy, especially in the 21st century.
That's very important because there was a study that was released last week stating that in every state in the United States, if you make minimum wage, regardless whether it's the federal or state level, you cannot afford a one-bedroom apartment anywhere in the United States. Period. If you work a full wage, and that's ridiculous because one of the biggest driving philosophies here in the States, at least, is you pull yourself by your bootstraps. If you have a job and you work hard, you can achieve a living, and that is not the case. And what this global collapse has demonstrated here is that it's really never been the case, and it's really just shown the fractures of the different, economic states that people are in.
Yeah, and again, when it comes to housing as well, this is a situation where the economy is again oriented towards the top. I mean, when stuff is being built, it's we're not building affordable housing right now. I mean, we're building larger houses when we build stuff. We're building luxury condos. We're building stuff that the people at the bottom can't have access to, and it's just making things more expensive at the bottom as well. And you're forcing people to move further away. You're making the economy not work at the bottom, and that's really it. I wrote a piece on this called Google Homes and Wiki Houses, and it's about this idea that if you do actually finally start giving people an unconditional income, enough to afford rent, then you've got this money that people are guaranteed. And when you have this limited amount of money, say $1,000 a month that's guaranteed, then you want to save as much of that as you can. And you're also you're a solid bet as far as if you're going to cater to this market. Like, I think some business person is going to get rich off this idea, and that's that they're going to cater to the bottom, and they're going to say, all right, let's try to make homes as cheap as possible. Let's give them. What's the best deal that we can do? Like, how can we spend little money? Like, can you 3D print a home? Can you do like the wiki houses where you can actually manufacture it yourself using cheap parts or whatever? Like, or can you just create like communities where the houses or the homes are actually affordable? And of course, right now you can't do that because you've got the only way to do that is through like Section 8 programs, which you may or may not qualify for, or you have to have a job that you may not be able to get. But as soon as everybody's guaranteed money, then there's actually a market for that, and that market will meet that demand because people have that demand. So that's really going to change the game as far as affordable housing, I think. And I know one of the worries people have is that it's going to get super expensive. But again, I think it's important to recognize that competition exists, and capitalism will take advantage of that to actually meet that demand at the bottom.
Yeah, I'd be slightly less optimistic that that would happen soon. I think it's just important to mention that a lot of people who support basic income also support some kind of rent control system, because I think what you would see, I mean, in the liberalization of a lot of markets, you would eventually see, I think, through the use of technology, the internet, and all these things, a much more open housing market. But we must remember that housing is a very illiquid product. It's not something you can immediately change. It takes a lot of effort. There are a lot of reasons why you wouldn't want to move to a place. And so I think to expect the free market to be able to solve that problem of giving cheap housing to people might be a little much. And there are other very good arguments for having certain types of rent control in place anyway, without a basic income. But I think it's an important thing because I think there is a real danger of a large share of a person's basic income being taken by housing just because the circumstances are such that they can't choose a different place to live.
Yeah, well, I'm more actually against the rent control stuff. Not that entirely against it, but I would like just to avoid that if possible. And I think that one way we actually could go about this is let's say, because we already have like Section 8 programs, and one way we could do is when we introduce this, one of the steps of actual implementation would be actually helping people to move if that is their choice. And because this will really open up living all over the country. And I think that we really want to encourage people to live where they want to live. And if the only reason you're living in a super expensive city is because that's the only place you can get a job, then suddenly after basic income, you're like, well, do I want to live in downtown Manhattan anymore, or do I want to go somewhere else? And then if they do need some some moving money or whatever that's above and beyond, I think that's something that we can actually help with during that transition.
Well, one of the things, and I observed this, I lived in Las Vegas for 10 years, so I saw the whole boom and bust go on in Vegas. And one of the things I observed there is a lot of what is happening in the housing market, and is in all market, is the crony capitalism, where
Mm-hmm.
you have people that are given these designated lots and areas and businesses, and they're building these houses, and they pay for the cheap labor and the cheap stuff, and then they can turn around and maximize their profits, and they are not necessarily building these so-called affordable housings because they don't have to, because they've been given a
Oh,
favorable
sure.
market share. And the
Mm-hmm.
other thing is, a lot of times, a lot of these cities and states, they have what are kind of like what they want their city to look like. They want the shape of their city. But in particular, like with San Francisco, and they're having the whole tech versus basically the people that lived there in San Francisco for so long, with all the renting going up and people the gentrification is a lot of certain kinds of housing wasn't built because they want their houses to look like townhomes. They don't want skyscrapers. They don't want these mega houses, and so there's smaller places, or there's a lot of apartments in a certain area but not another area because of the designation. And I think we have to really reevaluate how we build homes and what we're building homes for, and build a flexibility for cities to be able to still maintain their look and shape, but acknowledge that there's just more people in the world. There's more people in your city.
Yeah, and again, the thing is that right now, without a basic income, we're existing in this
Mhm.
time where you really are required to be in or near cities if you want to, live a more middle class life. Especially, it's much
Mhm.
harder in the more rural areas or smaller cities. You want to live near opportunity,
Mhm.
and that's really what a lot of this cost is coming from. Is you're paying for opportunity, and because you're competing against each other. I mean, you've got people from all over the place, wanting to go, especially in San Francisco. In San Francisco, you've got people from all over that want to live there because that's where the opportunity is, and with New York, that's where the opportunity is. So you're paying so much in order to be able to do that. And I like the idea of a land value tax. I know that that's not something a lot of people will agree with, or even know about what that means even as well.
Well,
But
could you break it down and explain it? Because I've read different stuff and I'm totally confused on the issue of what it is.
yeah, so what it is it's an acknowledgement of the fact that the value of the land is not actually created by the person who owns it. So let's say you build a house and you spend $10,000, on the house or whatever, and then like Elon Musk builds a hyperloop that goes near your house. So all of a sudden your house is worth $200,000 instead of 50,000, 100,000, or whatever it was. Like it shoots up in price because of what someone else outside of it did. And so, where should that value go to, and how do we capture that value? And so, obviously, that value is created mostly, by everybody else. It's by public expenditures. It's by, the value of roads. It's by the value of utilities and just the businesses in that area. And all of this stuff that's created by everyone except for the person who owns that land is that's through adding the value. So what we do is, in order, a land value tax is just say a tax on that. It's more like saying that instead of owning the land, you rent it, And this is a Thomas Paine's idea from agrarian justice as well, before Henry George came up with his popularizing version of it. But it's just the idea that you owe a rent to everybody who adds the value to it, and therefore everybody should actually get a portion of that. So what you would do is you would charge, you would put a tax on the property, on the value of it itself, like not the structures built on it, but just the value of the land. And then that revenue would be pooled, and then you would share a dividend of that revenue. So one effect of this is, like, if you're looking at, say, San Francisco, then let's say you've got a high-rise building, full of tech companies, and next to it is like a parking lot with just one little parking lot. And so both of those, the land is worth the same thing, and there's different stuff built on it, but the land is worth the same, and it's both a lot of money. So on the one hand, with the full of businesses, right now they're paying a lot more tax on that, and the parking lot is paying hardly anything. So land value tax looks at this and goes, well, wait a second, if you want to have a parking lot on this, that's fine, but you need to pay the same. You're going to pay like $20,000 a year, instead of $1,000 or something, So then suddenly it's like, well, I can't afford to have a parking lot here, so I'm going to have to sell this to somebody who wants to develop it, or I'm going to have to build up to say, like, I'll build a 10-story structure or a 20-story parking structure or something. It's a means of encouraging people to take advantage of that. And whereas on the other hand, like with the company next door, like they could actually, their taxes would go down, because right now they're being taxed on everything that they built, and we don't want to tax the stuff that you do that adds on top of it. We want to encourage that. And so this also is a way of actually encouraging the creation of more housing without a rent control as well. So that's one of the reasons that I like it.
So is a land value tax is not like property taxes, which are kind of static in the sense that they're the same payment unless whomever decides to raise it or not, and the value tax is going to go up and down due to the value of the property in itself?
Right. So it's separate than a property tax in that, just imagine, you have to figure out the value of the land, and you have to calculate this, but we'd have to figure out the value of the land minus the structure on top of it. And so let's say a house would sell for somewhere, say, for $250,000. So how much is the actual house worth? So let's say the building itself is, say, $50,000. So then the value of the land is $200,000. So that's what you would pay taxes on.
Okay, that makes sense. It's a much easier explanation than what I've been reading, because it was just numbers and property, and I was like, I'm done. I'm done.
Yeah, it can be. It's kind of one of those ideas that you really have to study. Mm-hmm. And just first hearing about it, a lot of people don't know about it either. It's just one of those ideas that's kind of exists for a while. Economists love it. Like it's another thing. Like, so Milton Friedman, he's more known, at least among the basic income movement and people who are interested in the basic income, that Milton Friedman was a supporter of basic income through his negative income tax idea. But he actually preferred a land value tax as he being an even better tax. Not that he didn't want a negative income tax as well. He's just thinking that, okay, as far as taxes goes, and he's speaking to people who hate taxes, but as far as taxes goes, he thinks that he agreed with Henry George, and he believed that land value tax was the best possible tax that there was because of the incentives it creates and the way it functions.
But, well, that's well and good, but what about areas where the value of the land is not that great because you're in, like, the Dakotas, and there's really nothing out there?
Well, yeah. I mean, it's not so much about that's a cheaper land, so you're not really. The point of it is that you're sharing the dividends, sharing the value of high value stuff. So if you're out in the middle of nowhere, yeah, there's no. That's not really the purpose of sharing the value of the land, because it's not really, a valuable land. But when you create valuable land in cities, especially, it generates a huge amount of revenue, and that revenue should be given to everybody who has added that value. So it fits right along with, and is one of a powerful funding method for basic income, as far as it can create a lot of revenue. And it's something that, like Alaska, can be seen as revenue through shared common resources, and not something that's a tax on, say, income tax, which so many people just hate the idea of.
And
Yes.
also, it's worth mentioning that basic income acts like a really good incentive for decentralization because, maybe in the US it might be more difficult to set this, but I know in Ireland, it being relatively similar wealth in different parts of Ireland, it's relatively uniform in the amount people earn. You can have a situation where you're paying out a set amount to the whole country, whether they live in the city centre or whether they live out in the equivalent of Dakota. And
Right.
because of that, you're giving people incentive to move out of the cities, and therefore there's less competition in the cities for those rents, and then ideally you would have lower rents and lower, what in effect it would do, especially alongside a land value tax, is it would force the the decentralization of the country, and force the values of cities down, and force the
Right.
values of country areas up.
Yeah, that's why I see it as it's a very strong means of re-strengthening. Main Street USA is how we
Yeah,
think of it here. Like, if you go through main streets now, it's almost like bombs have gone off in certain
Yes.
small towns. And
the same in Ireland.
yeah, as soon as we actually start giving everybody a minimum amount of money, I guarantee those small towns are going to have a rebirth. It's going to be it's a game changer to actually be able to allow access to income again that has been removed from these places.
Well, just to go a little bit on that, and then I want to kind of talk about cryptocurrencies here.
Yeah.
Uh, I don't know how it is in Ireland, but here in the States, particularly in the Southwest, pretty much the federal government owns 80% of the land. And so there's only so much you can build out. And there's other states that are like that where there's a lot of state-owned land and a lot of federal-owned land.
Mhm.
How would the incentive be for people to move out when you're kind of boxed in? I mean, you would have to leave to a different state or a different region. I
Well,
mean,
I mean,
would
yeah, there's still a whole lot of land out there for to develop, and
hmm
you can even look at how things went, right before the housing crash. Like, I was actually living in Arizona at the time, and
hmm
Arizona is one of those places that was just building like crazy.
yeah,
Like, they had so many new areas that were being built up. And again, yeah, we can do that at any point. I mean, just like right now, we still have, like 5 houses per homeless person that are vacant. We have so much housing supply, and we have so much room to make more housing supply, but we just don't have people living in these places. And that's something that we need to change. It's not that it's impossible to build out in these areas. I mean, it's just a matter of making sure that people can actually afford the payments.
okay. And now, how I've seen different things, but and I also looked into the fair share subreddit there. How would the blockchain technology, I guess it would be the best way to put it, would enable for the basic income to exist? Because it seems like many people are seeing it as a means of making this happen.
Oh yeah, yeah. So I also recommend checking out groupcurrency.org, and that says it's more of a definition of this idea of how we can actually distribute basic income through cryptocurrency. And it's this idea. It just breaks down your kind of core definitions of it being, something that you've got an identified, you've got certain group members. In the case, in the U.S., it would be, say, citizens. With a cryptocurrency, it can be whatever you want to define as those who use the currency, and it needs to provide an income to everybody equally. And and then, of course, with the blockchain, you can actually have transparency, which is vital to be able to change the game as far as the way we look at government. And then just this option of saying, you know, like this argument right now is like, or one argument can be, well, why would we want to give basic income when we can invest in infrastructure, and when there's so much other stuff that you can that the government can do. And so this is through cryptocurrency, you can say, well, yeah, we want to give everybody an income, and then we also want to be able to choose as a group to invest in certain things with large amounts of capital. And so that's another optional thing that you can do. Is it's almost like a way of kickstarting within the currency. It's saying that, we want to build a bridge, so let's get everybody who wants to contribute to this voluntarily, and then people who contribute have the voting rights, to choose how to spend that money because they're the ones investing in it. And so it's a way of using cryptocurrency to accomplish what governments now accomplish, but with actual democracy and total transparency. So that's another means of doing it. But I think the biggest selling point for cryptocurrency is, one, you've got it. It can be a global thing, so there's no borders anymore. And so someone living in the U.S. gets the same income through that currency as someone living in, say, Africa or India. And when you do that, I mean, you cut down borders, and that's a huge thing. And of course the voluntary aspect of it. And so you'd say that with the use of a cryptocurrency, say just exchanges themselves generate the revenue. So no one has to be taxed. It's just using the currency itself can generate the revenue that the people using it can split among themselves as an income.
Is there anything you want to add there, Ed?
Yeah, also one of the main problems with the basic income, and one of the reasons you see charities doing test runs and pilot programs in Kenya specifically, is because in Kenya they have a very common banking system based on mobile phones called M-Pesa, and it means that they don't have to actually bring Kenyan dollars to remote villages and give them out, and all the security implications that would have. So, if you think about one of the reasons why basic income and cryptocurrencies, become intertwined so much, is because it allows the currency to be either distributed directly to a user or else to be created by the user. There's different paradigms for how money creation happens. But another thing is that it seems that it'll be possible, and I was following it for a while, this project that was basically trying to embed 2 or 3 points of identification in a blockchain for each person on the network, so that you would be able to go to a shop, or if there was a situation in which you needed to identify yourself, you could have a hashed piece of data that through private key cryptography would only be visible to the user and the accessor, and through that be able to have something like a biometric scan or something like that to be able to identify each person. This would allow a much simpler way of being able to allow people to identify themselves without having to go through government systems or some kind of legal systems that might compromise the aims of the currency in the first place.
Yeah, that's another point. That's a really good point to make as well, too, to focus on the fact that this is very much P2P, more so than anything else, and it's by using cryptocurrency, then it knocks down those barriers that could prevent that, and also middlemen and people who would absorb as rentiers some form of that, like just through using the phones in Uganda and Kenya that Give Directly is doing. You're not losing money to banking institutions that are taking money out. Yeah. This is something that we're seeing actually in the States right now with with the welfare reform bills, and they're saying that let's make it so that people using food stamps, and welfare and stuff, whatever, like you're using their EBT cards, like let's make it so that they can only take out $20, at a time or something. And so what happens is that you think that makes sense, and that you're forgetting the fact that there's a transaction fee for every time you do that. So you're taking money away. You're reducing the amount of money that they have to spend by forcing them to do these certain things. And when you use a cryptocurrency, it cuts through all of that.
Well,
There's no more ability to control that.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit because I used to think about that as well as peer-to-peer, and then you have things like Ripple and chain analysis out there, where Ripple has now totally changed the way it does things, where it's capable of freezing people's funds and payments, and potentially you can probably even code a reversal where they can go in and take your stuff. And so I'm concerned about the other side with any kind of tool that it can be used in a negative fashion where there will be a kind of exertion of control on the end of the government, because they already do this with the welfare state. I mean,
Oh,
it's
sure.
ridiculous the things that they do on the welfare state, honestly.
Yeah, it is, and that's also, I mean, it's the nature of technology that there's always a way of using it in one way and using it in another way that's going to have totally different effects. And I guess when I talk about P2P, I'm actually focusing more on the spending side of things.
Hmm.
Saying that as soon as you make it, like with cryptocurrency, with Bitcoin, it's really shown how you can really interact in a way that's very very similar to cash. At either long distances or short distances, you can have a transaction with somebody on the other side of the country to purchase something from them that they've made, or you could do it, right in front of you, and you're doing a transaction on your phone or whatever. And like all of this stuff is direct transactions where you're not losing money, and you're enabling people to make those transactions. And I think that's really important for the economy to function well. And we've seen that actually. One of the more interesting findings in the India basic income experiment, uh, according to Guy Standing led this, and it was fascinating how one of the effects actually was lowered prices of goods. And explanation of this is that money scarcity actually has this effect where goods are more expensive than they need to be, because nobody actually has access to what you need to do this. So let's say you have to get out a loan in order to buy some fruit or whatever. But as soon as everybody actually has a small amount of money, then the markets actually develop around that. So suddenly, like, there's competition, and suddenly there's meeting that demand for those markets. It's the same, it's the opposite, like of like our food deserts. Like
Hmm.
we've got places in the United States where you can't actually just go down the street and get some fresh fruit. Like, it just doesn't exist. You can go, there's 10 liquor stores around you that sell like some candy or whatever, but what you can't do is buy some fruit. Like, you have to actually have access to a car, or you have to actually use mass transit to go somewhere. Like, all of this is it's a symptom of people not having money to spend into the market in order to have their demands voiced. So once you're actually able to have that, once money is no longer scarce, then that's what I mean by more P2P, is that this actually creates a universal market, whereas right now we're not functioning in that way. There's so much unvoiced demand out there that the markets that we're seeing, they're not accomplishing what they could be.
Do you want to add to that, Ed?
No, I don't think so. You covered it pretty well.
Okay. Well, I want to elaborate a little more because just personally, my observation of the welfare state, and I have been unemployed during the global collapse, is that when you look at these food desert places, and one of the minimum requirements here in the States is that in order to have someone spend EPT at your place, all you have to do is sell milk, eggs, and I believe baby formula. And that's like the bare minimum requirement. And as
Right.
long as you have those three things, you can have EPT. And then you have this kind of cronyism going on where you can buy Monster, that sugary monster drink, or
Hmm.
Red Bull with your
Hmm.
EPT. That's considered food. So
Right.
you have all these convenience store places that are basically selling junk and stuff like that, and you don't actually have grocery stores in these places. But the other thing I observed is when you go to some of these places, and it could be like a block difference. as far as the way cities are built, at least in Vegas, where you can have the same store, same company or whatever, like a 7-Eleven, and you go the block over, which is in the better neighborhood, and the price difference is dramatic, from anywhere from 75 cents to $2 difference in
Mm-hmm.
lower prices, because the people in that good neighborhood are not going to spend their money in that store. But the
Mm-hmm.
people that are
Yeah.
trapped in these food deserts, they have nowhere else to spend, and it's not technically considered price gouging, and they're still making the requirement for the EPT because they have milk, eggs, and baby formula. And I'm just concerned that if the basic income, because one of the things that they're talking about is replacing the welfare system, in that is that these people are going to still be trapped in these type of places where they're not,
Yeah.
there are only certain places they can spend, and they're going to still get price gouged, and it's going to eat up into their funds.
Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning as well that maybe this doesn't speak directly to the food situation you're talking about, but
Uh-huh.
the there's a certain wing of the basic income movement that's interested in due to trying to promote sustainability. If you
Yes.
think about local products and things like that, they often only happen in wealthy areas. You
Yeah.
think about East places like that where you have these small artisanal shops and you do have a baker locally to you. I do believe that given, the analogy I always use is pottery. So a
Hmm.
lot of people take up pottery as a hobby, but you very rarely see pottery nearby you or a pottery workshop. And that seems a strange thing because I can imagine a lot of people that enjoy pottery and would like to spend their days making fairly plain bowls and plates. And yet the system as we have it means we drive to the IKEA, over outside the town, and then we all go in and buy those mass-produced ones. And the reason that we can't have pottery made by a local person is because that person cannot sustain a lifestyle on the equation doesn't work. They have to charge too much for these handmade goods, and because they have to charge too much, they're not able to sell enough to make a living. And
Mm-hmm.
yet, I think there are a lot of people that are passionate about things in this life, and I think you would see a local potter. And at the end of the day, is it not better if you think about the materials of pottery for somebody to be making on site, because all you need is clay, water, and a few other small materials. And I think
Mm-hmm.
if we had a basic income, we'd see a lot more, people doing these small shops and building a small economy out of their passions because they're
Right.
able to be backed by basic income. And I would imagine that in some of these food deserts, there are people that would like to be a grocer or a fruit and vegetable seller or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Right. Growing urban gardens, local gardens,
Exactly.
co-ops. Yeah, for
So
sure.
you with that Ed, you see like a kind of like a reversal to where like in the 50s in the States, where you literally had like the meat guy, the baker guy, your milk person delivering your milk, kind of like going back, being more localized in that fashion with a basic income instead of these, mass supermarkets.
Oh, definitely. I'd love to see that. I mean, I think there's a reason why we find the death of the main street so hard to take, and it's because it's so much a part of our everyday lives. I mean, Ireland has only been a developed economy, a very Western economy in the last 20 years, and I grew up in an Ireland where there wasn't big supermarkets and there wasn't big malls, and you would go to each of those shops, And I remember going in with my and she'd be talking to the butcher about what happened in the street the other day and who got married and this, that, and the other thing, and it created a social context in which people knew each other and could understand each other and be able to appreciate each other on a better level, and ideally reverse some of this kind of atomization that capitalism and the internet and our increased technology can do. Just to allow people, a lot of people, we basic income supporters would have, you know, a philosophical argument against work, but at the same time, you can't deny against work maybe in the 40-hour week format, but
Hmm.
nobody can deny that humans are the working animal and that a vast majority of people gain their place in life and their understanding of their self-respect and that kind of thing through what they do and they do in society. And a basic income is about allowing people to do that, allowing them to set up, whatever home business or small business they want to, and and to a certain extent allowing the market to decide which should be useful or relevant.
Well, do you see, I did kind of go on that, do you see, like, because I see that where people talked about not working so much but volunteerism, but do you see, like, in a sense that where you will have people being more like nurses' aides because they like helping people, but they know they couldn't do that for a living because it's not sustainable. But they can do something like that, or these jobs that are not necessarily paid well but are essential to society
Oh yeah.
because you have to
Hmm.
care for the elderly, you have to, take care of kids. Someone has to
Yeah.
pick up the garbage, even though garbage men do get paid well. But actual like physical street sweepers instead of the cars, like someone actually going through the street and getting all the muck and stuff like that.
Yeah, I
No.
mean, just if I could just put in one thing, I mean, if you think about the way a basic income will give everybody the means to survive, what it does is it rebalances the age-old, you know, balance between labor and capital in
Mhm.
favor of labor, and it allows people to say, well, hold on, I don't need to do this toilet cleaning job to survive, so I prefer not to do it. And I think there needs to be a rebalancing because we see many of these jobs that are most important to society and create the best outcomes for people around them are
Mhm.
often paid the least. You know, nurses are a great example of that. And
Yes.
just to kind of finish this point by saying, in Ireland we have this reoccurring scandal that happens. You know, every 6 months to a year, one of the news teams sends in a team, you know, with hidden cameras to film some of the care homes in Ireland, and you
Mhm.
know, inevitably they find that the elderly or the disabled are being mistreated, and you know, I can't help thinking every time, is this not the eventual outcome when you commercialize the human motivation? Because the only people that are going not an elderly person that is really annoying and infirm, maybe they have Alzheimer's and they're hard to deal with, is their relatives or their community, people that saw them when they were a real person and is able to deal with them in dignity. And I don't know exactly how it would be articulated. I think you're kind of on the right lines there talking about assistant nurses or volunteer nurses. What I would like to see is that kind of thing being brought back into the community. And by giving I think there are a huge amount of people that are motivated to do that. You often will see, you know, when you discuss this issue with people, you'll hear about people saying that the worst decision they ever had to make was putting their parents into a home or a parent into a home, and that is because they don't want to do it. They're forced to by the situation of having to go and earn a wage to be able to keep the rest of their lives afloat.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd also like to point out too that we're actually already seeing this wanting to follow your passion as well through technology. Like I would say, you know, Etsy is a great example of this, and I would also say Patreon, which I use, is a good example of this. It's just these ways that you can actually uh, create stuff on your own and sell that to other people, or at least you know, earn income through that for other people through these creative endeavors. You know, through so Etsy, you could make sculptures or paintings or whatever, and then through Patreon, you know, you can create comic books, you can write, you can make YouTube videos, you can make music, you know, all these things, and we're seeing people do this, and you're seeing people, you know, earning money off of this too, and right now they're doing it on the side. But you know, suddenly, if once we have a basic income, how many more of these people are going to start pursuing these passions that they have full time instead of just part time? I think we will see a lot of that. And so you mentioned care work is one of those things, and I believe that's another one of those as well, where you're going to be able to pursue that care work that you couldn't right now. And if you're forced to work 60 hours a week in order to say afford someone to watch your kid that you're paying for, you know, why not with a basic income reduce your hours to from 60 to say, you know, 30, something more sane, and you were able to be able to watch your own kid or even help watch other kids, others as well, and you can actually share that among each other. Like you could have, say, a group of people each slightly reduce their hours at work, and then, you know, trade off days that they're watching each other's kids instead of paying for daycare. Like there's a lot more sharing that's possible through this, and whereas right
Yeah.
now sharing reduces your total income, with a basic income, you're actually not hurt by doing this sharing because you still have income without work. I think
Yeah,
that's a big point to make.
childcare has to be the most insane one because I mean, essentially, you have this situation where it's an obvious case where standards of living have gone down. Ireland is supposedly a richer country than it was in the 70s, and yet in the 70s, 95% of families were mother and father in this um, atomic kind of family system where one parent went and worked, and generally the wife stayed at home and took care of kids. And now we're supposed to be this much more progressed, and yet to be able to earn this weird cycle happens whereby childcare is really expensive, so both parents work to be able to earn enough to pay for childcare,
Hmm.
and yet it would be much more efficient and probably would have better outcomes for all of society if the parents had a more active role in taking care of their own kids, which they can do for free in a way, as Scott is just saying, as long as the opportunity cost doesn't mean that they're missing out on income that they could get otherwise.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, there's another notion that you guys' discussion is bringing up that people talk about that in the future, in a sense, there's going to be a sense of shared jobs where two people are doing the same job and they're switching off as far as
Hmm.
hours, and you have the reduced hours where people are still working like the ideal amount is what most people are talking about is 30 hours a week, and you are literally sharing this job with a person, and it seems that a basic income would make that inevitable and possibly a probability.
Oh, sure. And I mean, we're actually already seeing this is another something that we're seeing already. I mean, we've been seeing this transition from full-time 40 plus hour a week jobs working at one place for decades to part-time jobs with where you may or may not get certain, 5 hours. You'll get 5 hours one week, 20 hours another week. Maybe you'll get your schedule a few hours in advance. There's so much more precariousness in the way that we work versus the way that we used to, and a lot of this because in a way we're already sharing this labor and we're already saying using technology to increase the productivity. So like say, a business, if it doesn't need someone to work there, then it'll just let you go and then call you back when it needs it. And like from a capitalist perspective, that sounds great because it's you're saving money on labor and it's much more efficient. But as far as the human side of things, that's not great because you have no security. You don't know, are you going to earn enough at work this week in order to pay for your rent at the end of the month? Are you going to be able to afford enough to eat? Like you don't know these things, and that's the way that we're going as the nature of work changes to these more, like an Uber economy kind of thinking where it's on demand, self-employed, entrepreneurial labor where people are freelancing. That's where we're going towards. And yeah, basic income can actually change that from a negative thing to a positive thing. Like you can actually, once you have a basic income, you can choose how much work you want to do, and then you're okay, with 5 hours this week and 10 hours this week or whatever, and you can find work elsewhere without worrying about being able to make the rent or being able to eat.
Okay. Well, the other thing I want to talk about, and we kind of touched on it a little bit with the land tax, is how is this going to get paid? Because one of the biggest things about this is that people are very concerned about the expense of placing a basic income into society.
Hmm. Yeah, so it's probably the most frequently asked question, and once you get past agreeing with it or disagreeing with it, you can say, okay, well, how are you going to pay for it? Well, I have multiple answers to that question, but the one thing that really got me when I first got into basic income was a talk by Alan Watts, and where he's basically explaining everything that's happening as far as like what happens when the machines start taking away your job, and then what are you going to do? And his response, is saying that, oh, is this someone's like, oh my gosh, we just give people money, and that's socialism, that's communism, like that's crazy. But it's like, well, yeah, we have to do that, or else there's no point in the the machine doing all this, and so that we have to actually get this money to people in order to pay for what the machines are producing. Because if we don't, the system will break down. So if you look at it from this philosophical perspective of where the money is coming from, I say it's coming from the machine's contribution to our massive productivity. And if you look at what we would be earning right now if incomes did track with productivity for the past few decades, we'd all be earning $50,000, $60,000 instead of $20,000. I mean, it's a huge difference. There's all this, our productivity decoupled from incomes, and it's just been stagnant. So basic income is a way of crossing that gap that we lost. It's a way of giving people a share of that productivity that.
Uh-oh.
Did we lose Scott?
It's not. Can you still hear me?
Okay.
So
yeah, you cut out for a second.
Okay, sorry about that.
Okay.
So that's my philosophical answer to it, where the money comes from. But as far as like funding methods, when it comes to the brass tacks of coming up with a bill that's going to go up, and be passed as law, I think we need I call it a toolkit. I want like a taxation toolkit of different means of providing the revenue for it. So, I think that we should do a value-added tax. I think that we should. It would be nice if we could get a land value tax as part of it. It would be nice to. I like the idea of switching to a flat income tax and actually being able to reduce people's income taxation overall. Like, we can actually put together this package that reduces people's current income tax burdens for 80% of the population. I mean, it's completely possible. Like, we can introduce a basic income at the same time as reducing income taxes for 8 out of 10 people, 9 out of 10 people even. It's just at the very, very top. And it's possible because people don't understand just how extreme inequality has gotten. Like, if you look at graphs that are normalized or not normalized, but depending on how you look at it, it's just an extreme, just ridiculous exponential spike that happens at the end of these curves. There's just so much money at the end there. And so it's important that when we get basic income, it's a way of shifting that revenue that's just been locked up at the top, and enable the rest of the economy to function. Because all that, I call it it's like an engine, or it's like a human body with like all the blood is being pumped up to the brain, and the brain saying that, like, I don't need the feet, I don't need the hand. I don't need anything else. I'm the most important part of this body, so I need all the blood. And of course, if that happens, the body dies. So we have to make sure that we keep that. We need a circulatory system for capitalism. That's what basic income is. It's a way of making sure that income that's clotted up at the top actually gets distributed in a way through the rest of the system for the whole thing to work.
Okay. Before we get into you, Ed, I have to use the facilities real quick, so I'll be right back. I'm sorry.
No worries. What was the name of the Alan Turing talk? Because it's excerpt that's always put up, isn't there? Or A Man and the Machine or something.
Oh yeah, it's on my blog. I'll send you the link here. So yeah, that was one of the first things I did, was transcribe that talk, and and then so I decided to finally make a blog where I combined both the video and the transcription. So yeah, so there's the link. I just added it to the chat.
Thanks.
And yeah, I just think it was just such a profound point. It's like one of those first things that I came across. When I think it may have been right before or after I became a regular in the basic income sub, but it was a while ago, and I just it's like, okay, this is awesome. I just have to write this out word for word.
Yeah, I think it was the first thing that really struck me of the importance of it was just that basic, thing. It was reading our futurism posts and then making the point that self-driving cars are great, but they'll put loads of people out of work. How do we have a system in which that's great for everybody?
Right.
And that
Yeah.
basic problem, that paradox there of the system, I couldn't see a way out of it unless a basic income, or I haven't heard a better solution to that problem yet.
Yeah, yeah, and it's funny too. Like CGP Cray was right about how some people can say watch this video and just be totally worried about what's going to happen and believe that's a problem and in seeking a solution, and then it's possible to point that person to basic income, and then if they have moral issues with it, then suddenly they no longer see automation as a problem. Then they'll be like, oh well, actually, I'm sure we can actually make enough jobs after all. And
Yeah.
so it's funny. I saw that recently with my latest trucks article too, when people will compliment me. They'll be like, "I love that piece all the way up to the end," and then I totally disagree with that. And like, it's funny how that works.
Okay, I am completely back now. Um,
I just
and
would like to make a point if I could,
yes.
yeah. Um, just on this how to pay for it topic, it is very important, and it'll be, I presume that once it becomes, the closer and closer basic income becomes to implementation, the more and more that debate will take up what is the basic income debate. But I'd like
Hmm.
to say that what we're doing right now is we're talking about how we fund a basic income system in the paradigm of a system that's fundamentally broken. Like Scott is saying, there's this huge amount of wealth tied up in financial instruments that are basically just paper, that are all interlinked in a way that they all create a monetary system which pays certain parts of society or certain parts of the economy money, but nobody else. But but like, I have a real problem with the way inflation as a concept is understood and is debated.
Hmm.
Because what we seem to do is, and the fundamental problem that I have with it, and a lot of people will have, is that inflation for bread, it's the same concept that they're talking about as inflation for, hedge funds, or, whatever treasury bills, or whatever financial instrument is being discussed. And whilst a lot of the ideas we have about economics are based on, distribution of goods in the most efficient way, we have this system that has so much wealth at the top of it that that becomes a stranglehold around the rest of the economy. And so if we could, and I have a real worry that in the future, what we've got right now is we've so much wealth sloshing around this financial system that if we start to hit another big financial problem, you might see basically everybody in the world trying to convert that nominal wealth into real wealth, into actual assets, whether it's gold or land or whatever, the great rush for the door. And when that happens, you will see huge inflation, because all of a sudden this very speculative money that's at the very top of the financial system that we never see day to day is
Hmm.
suddenly brought down to the average person's world, and then you have a major problem.
Well, we're
And
already beginning to see that. I mean, there's
Right.
already been a significant shift in purchasing of gold, silver, and property within the last 2 years, I would say. A big
mm,
jump versus the gradual, like, speculative stuff that happens typically. It
yeah,
seems
and
like
and
we're reaching that bubble, and I don't know if it's because of the way the oil is going, or if it's the student loan thing here in the States, or it's just everything is being called in. All the margins are
yeah,
just being called in at the same time.
my personal view is that it's an agglomeration of the fact that the real, essential problems that we're talking about, some of the reasons we're promoting basic income as a solution, are all coming together to basically, I mean, capitalism is a system. The current iteration of capitalism is a system to make markets work, to make an economy work, and capitalism the problems with it in the way it's been implemented in the world couldn't help but affect the economy. Inequality is the economy, and so you know, I I can't see that the world will become. I can't see that it won't just become more and more fragile. We have greater and greater crashes and booms until we have a system where the wealth and the financial system represents actual output by actual people.
Yeah, and that's actually it's an important point to make too. Is that one of the benefits of basic income is going to be a more stable economy as well. And there's actually evidence for this too from Alaska, where the existence of the dividend functions as a $1 billion additional company. Basically, it's like it functions as a huge corporation effectively. And so instead of just being based on oil, the economy being based on, like, say, fishermen and oil drilling and stuff, then there's actually this consumer income that is able to stabilize the economy through the existence of consumer economy. So just by having a basic income, it's going to be more stable, and which is very important because there's so much lost through these ups and downs and stuff. And I guess another point I want to make too, as anytime we talk about if we can't afford basic income and how we can go about doing it, I really think it's important to stress that basic income is going to save us money in the long run. It could even save us money in the immediate short term, but definitely in the long term, because there's so many expenses that we are spending right now that we don't consider to be expenses. Like, we just pretend that we need to be spending this much money on our healthcare systems and this much money on our criminal justice systems and this much money on insurance and this and that, like all these other expenses that we think we just take for granted as stuff that we just have to pay, but we don't have to pay it to the degree that we are. By reducing inequality, by reducing poverty, there's so many effects from that will reduce the amount of total spending that we're spending. So if we want to save money, we need to actually enact a basic income. So this question of if we can afford it needs to actually be flipped around on its head, because we can actually save money by doing it.
Well, I want
Yeah,
to talk a
just
little. Okay, go ahead, Ed.
yeah, just an analogy on that to make sense of that on a personal level. It's interesting to note that often middle class families are able to buy products a lot cheaper than working class people are. And the reason for that is that they have the time and they have the wealth to be able to have the internet and be able to check out these different places to get the best deal possible. You'll often find that people that have less money end up spending a lot more for individual products because they don't have a car to be able to go to the cheap wholesale place or something like
Mm-hmm.
that. So it perfectly makes sense that if you provide people with this standard income and this reliable source of money, then they can plan on a more long-term basis and even on their personal level make a more efficient purchase for themselves, and that
Mm-hmm.
ultimately leads to the economy being more efficient.
Right, making your money go farther just on its own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I want to talk about both a negative and a positive thing here. The interest it would be, for example, the people on the top to implement basic income. Because if you look at, due to the global collapse, but there's other society issues that have been going on for a long time. If you look at the things that happened like in the Mideast and what's going on in Africa and certain parts of Southeast Asia, where you have such a high unemployment rate, you have people that were literally starving, and then governments, because they're so discontent with their government, have collapsed. It would seem it would be the interest in the power structure to have a basic income to meet the needs of the people, to where there's not such a I can't say the word, but because there's the lack of jobs, or the lack of means in society. And the positive thing I want to talk about is this upcoming Sweden vote on the possible potential implications of a basic income.
For Switzerland.
Or Switzerland, I'm sorry, not Sweden.
Yeah.
I get those two confused. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a really good article that I suggest reading as an introduction to why the rich would support it, and that's it's why the tech elite are getting behind basic income. So if you Google tech elite and basic income, you'll find it. But it's about how popular this idea is in the Silicon Valley, and you've got venture capitalists backing the idea. You've got major names behind this, and they're talking about it as, from their perspective, a basic income is like a universal venture capital. It's a way of everybody to have the ability to pursue their entrepreneurial spirit. And you see this evidence, actually. It's fascinating if you look at, like, in the Namibia pilot experiment, when they gave people basic incomes there, the self-employment went up 300%. Like, once people had the ability to do what they wanted to do, they did it. And you see the same thing too in the Liberia pilot experiment. And this was actually basically giving a basic income to the poorest of the poor. And so you would think that the poorest of the poor can't do much. That's this logic that says, oh, well, if they're poor for a reason or whatever. But as soon as you give them money, then they had 1/3 of the people who got money started their own businesses. And it just, these numbers are huge. Like, when you actually try it out, where basic income is tried, you see these huge entrepreneurial effects. And so that's definitely one reason for the top to support an idea like this, is because it'll really drive innovation much faster and much farther than what we have right now.
Ed, do you want to? Yeah. Go ahead.
I would also, another important reason too is for consumer, demand, especially as time goes forward. So if the rich want us to be able to afford their products, then people are going to need money to buy them. So that's a very simple answer as well.
Yeah, Scott, was the subtitle of that article "And Why You Should Be Worried"?
Yeah, I think it was.
Or was that a different one? Because I remember reading an article and
I think they ended it that way. They were like, so basic income is a good idea and they want it, but maybe we don't want Silicon Valley designing it. I think that was.
I think because that big libertarian slant in Silicon Valley that says, basic income is a way we can get rid of all these government services, and and basically we can have this automated government which doesn't really care who or what you are. It just, you get paid out a certain amount of money so that we can get rid of these huge big kind of social welfare schemes for various things. And I think that really it really attracts the interest of those types, because it seems a very concrete way to starve the beast, as they call it, to make government smaller. And yet I think we do have to be wary about that kind of cut and burn attitude of saying, that affects me too, because I do think that there's a lot of bad has come out of paternalistic governments trying to do good things for people. And yet I wonder, are these the people that should be pushing the debate, since I think that they can be libertarian to that extent because they don't have to rely on these services. After all, they're wealthy billionaires. They don't really realize what it's like being on the bottom. And it's easy for them to say, well, now that people have access to an income, they can get X, Y, and Z, when, they don't really understand what it's like when you're living like that.
Yeah.
Well, I have a very significant issue with a lot of Silicon Valley philosophy there. They don't seem to be treat humans very well. They seem to have a very human problem, and I don't know if it is because of the ability to think in the manner that is necessary to create technology. There's a disconnect when it comes to emotions and connections with people, and it's just a fundamental flaw with the group of people that are like that, or it's just they're oblivious. I'm not sure which it is, but there is a problem. You should look at the way they treat their workers, like the drivers and stuff, or the fact that they're buying up this property in San Francisco and not caring about the people that live there. The lower income people, the middle class people, people of color that lived in this area, built this community, and then you're pushing them out.
Yeah, I can't remember where this took place, but it's such a story that really sticks with you, and that was how it was at some conference or some con or something like that, and and they were able to pay homeless people to walk around with Wi-Fi, routers on them. So through this conference, you were able, to access Wi-Fi through these roaming, homeless people that had, the Wi-Fi hotspots attached to them. And like you had, Silicon Valley, whoever thought of that was like, oh, this is going to be great because like we're giving them a job and they're going to have money, and then not thinking about like, wow, like that on a personal human level, there's just something that feels really wrong about that. And like Uber is a great example too. How the CEO is just, I mean, he has every intention of completely eliminating the drivers with self-driving cars. And like on the one hand, I mean, we want that. We want self-driving cars, but the way he's looking at it is like he's temporarily using millions of people to build up a multi-billion-dollar international corporation, and then he's going to dump everybody that helped actually build it. Like, you can't actually have this company without the drivers, and this company would not exist without the drivers, and it wouldn't be popular without the drivers. So, but they're not going to get anything out of it in the long term. He's going to get tons out of it.
Because they're all independent contractors and they're not employees like when
Right,
Apple was founded and Google was initially founded. Yeah.
They don't get any stock. They don't get any pensions. There's nothing in it for them in the long term. They'll be replaced, and they just won't have an income anymore. But he will. He'll have an income for life because he's got all the Uber stock and everything he wants to get with that. Like, from his perspective, and it's this example of technological disruption that's and technological inequality from this, where the top benefits just so much more than everybody else.
Yeah, I think you could even say we're in a transition period where they benefit even more because, when we get to a situation where like, if you look at a lot of those kind of labor as a service kind of companies, there's one, Tasker is a big one in America, and basically, if you look at them, there's no real reason why there should be this traditional ownership structure. After all, it's a completely flat kind of peer-to-peer system, and there's the website and some apps and some back-end backing it, but the cost of that should be relatively little. And the first thing that somebody like me who's read a lot of socialist theory would think is like, well, why don't the workers own it? Stop that from happening. And part of what's stopping that from happening is that they're all working all the time. They don't have time to get together with their few friends and build an app and be able to go on this venture to be able to create a community-based Uber or something like that. And so the people with a lot of capital and with a lot of time and resources can step in and use these technologies that should be being used to allow workers to form cooperatives to do this kind of thing. I mean, Uber is a perfect example. It should be a cooperative.
Mm-hmm.
And these business owners can reap this huge amount of extra. It's like perfectly speaks to Marx and his idea of the labor theory of value, which is when somebody goes into work, they're exchanging all the potential profit from their lives. They're only paying for the time they're only being paid for the time they'll be there, not the actual what them being there creates in the greater sense. So the Uber driver might be getting paid a similar amount to what they're getting paid for doing taxi driving. It might be slightly less, but any of the benefits of the Uber app and any of the benefits of a smaller company structure are going to the owner and the board pretty much alone.
And that board is smaller than ever before too. I mean, these companies are so much smaller now than they used to be. So it's even more concentrated.
And it seems to be a significant disconnect between the people and the society at large, because with all the concentrated wealth within the Silicon Valley, there's no like Carnegie Hall. There's no effort besides I see like Bill Gates of them just going into and like giving funds to the public school system, building community centers or funding like tech STEM projects for students or any of these kind of significant charitable works that you used to have with some of these everyone talks about them in the bad way, these robber barons, but a lot of them did significant charitable and good work stuff, whether it's to clean their soul or not, but they did these things and it doesn't seem to be any of that going on at all.
Yeah, and I have a Carnegie library just down the road from me, and I'm sure both of you have some quite close to you too. I mean, it's
Yes.
amazing how you think about the value that he created when he did that.
Mhm.
I think all of this speaks to the fact, though, like if you think about their the libertarianism and the lack of empathy with people, is that
Mhm.
these people have made all their money through technological solutions, and then they see everything, the same. A man with a hammer sees every problem as a nail. They tend to see technical solutions, and I would be wary. When you talk about this crypto UBI, the potential for that to make a big difference, you also have to be very wary of the fact that it can be very easy to get into these large, complicated, technical solutions for what is really a social problem. I mean, the economy is a
Mm.
social issue, and
Yes.
I think that really appeals to people. Well, men especially, because they like creating systems, but also because you can build this technological framework and build it out. And you're seeing a lot of these startup organizations trying to do a crypto UBI. And the jump that they have to make, I'm a big fan of crypto UBI, but I can see the first one kind of paradoxically being started by a government or being backed by a large international organization, because of the fact that in that case it'll be through the paradigm of what we understand. It won't be a non-backed pure cryptocurrency. It'll be a cryptocurrency that trades one for one with the national currency or something like that.
Hmm.
I mean, some of them are like, where does this value come from? And they're like, the value comes from the network. And you're like, well, which comes first, and how can you create value if you've nobody on it? Whereas we have this economy already. We have these units that we give each other. We could piggyback off that. I have a proposal at the moment. Well, I'm kind of writing. I've been on and off thinking about it for a few years, and I've decided at the moment I'm looking into try and get some funding from the EU through a research and innovation grant to be able to basically write a test system for the EU giving out a basic income in a through a cryptocurrency of some kind. I mean, if you think about the fact that the ECB recently, the European Central Bank, decided that uh, they were going to undertake a quantitative easing scheme, and they're the
Oh.
last major central bank to do it. Yeah, and they're spending like 50 billion a month for 6 months or something. I think the overall amount is 300 around 50 billion. And
On top of the fact that Greece is going to default in June, they're going to be doing this.
well, it remains to be seen what happens with Greece. I actually personally think because we have there are different philosophies in the EU, but it's generally of the austerity school and the neoliberal school. But I do think underneath that, there's more of an appreciation for a different understanding of economics, and that it doesn't have to be as reductive as we have at the moment. And I can see that them getting, when it comes to the crunch with Greece, they're going to get a lot more open-minded and say, well, maybe having more debt isn't such a bad thing, and we'll start hearing that being said. Because I personally think if they allow Greece to leave the EU, it might survive for a while, but it won't survive for long, because it's the first major test that they've had under the current what is the current EU, and they will have failed it miserably. Um, so I mean, just getting back to the proposal I'm talking about, imagine you had the EU saying, instead of giving this 300 odd billion to buy assets off banks' balance sheets, how about we give it out to each EU citizen? Let's say we were to give every EU citizen, and then you can use the machinery of the EU and the state system to be able to validate each person and make sure they are who they are. And basically, everybody has an app of some kind. And on a Friday, they get a small amount of money that's one for one tradable with the EU. This isn't, sorry, with Euro. This isn't a basic income. It's a stimulus to the economy. And what it's going to do is it's going to mean, we have a very popular radio show in Ireland called Liveline, and in it every month or so they do a thing called Fiver Friday, and everybody, all these small businesses ring up. Tesco and the bigger multinationals aren't allowed ring up, but everybody says, fiver for a haircut or fiver for this. And the idea is that you get people out, going down to their local shops, going down to Main Street and getting a haircut, and then spending a bit of money here and there and kickstarting the economy for relatively little cost. And on the back of that, you could have this huge amount of data that the economists could use. You could also have a system in which you could withdraw the currency if you thought there was too much of it, because you have control over it from a central location, and because it's a complementary currency, you can manage a bit more without it being causing other problems in the economy. And also, one thing which probably wouldn't appeal to a lot of economists, but is certainly true, is the fact that there are these kind of internet trade wars happening, and the EU is trying to stop citizens for buying things on Alibaba in China, in these other countries. And if you had a regional European-based cryptocurrency, you have basically a feeless payment system, internet-based payment system for people in the EU, and it would be relatively easy to make sure that they weren't spending it outside there. So there's a lot of reasons why I think, although it goes against some of the more anarchist and libertarian elements that are in, and I prefer the idea of a peer-to-peer currency. I was an early adopter of Bitcoin. I could quickly see that, I think it's one of the most revolutionary ideas or technologies that's been invented in my lifetime, and I really like the peer-to-peer aspect of it, but I can't see it being able to become a worthwhile system with it being suddenly adopted by a lot of people. And I can't see that happening without being able to use the structure of the state system and the state monetary systems to get there.
Yeah, it seems like cryptocurrency can, at this point in time, show the way as something that can exist in the future. We can see a future where there's a global, cryptocurrency or something that everyone uses. But obviously, even with Bitcoin, I mean, you've seen Bitcoin has taken years to get where it is right now, and how long will it take to get to an even greater adoption, rate to even be equivalent to, like the dollar or something. And it's going to be a while, I think. And I think really the greatest value of cryptocurrency when it comes to basic income is to show people that it's possible to share in the value of something. There's if you're creating revenue, say through transaction fees, and so that everybody uses it, gets a little portion. It's this idea of a sharing of the commons, sharing of common value equally. I think it's a very powerful idea, and I think that's something that needs to spread, and I think that cryptocurrency can help spread that idea.
Well, for both the basic income and this cryptocurrency idea, do you think with the incoming vote that's going to occur in Switzerland, do you think that if there was a significant test case, and not some of these smaller things that people have done, but like a nation state doing this, do you see adoption would go farther and further than just talking about this and working on a legislative level and just working through the system?
Yeah, I think both me and Scott would agree that the first thing, the most achievable thing I think we could get now would be a pilot scheme. If a region of a country or a small country decided to implement a pilot scheme, I think I would predict the results would speak for themselves. I mean, any study that's happened in the past has had very positive results, and so I'm looking forward to the first one that happens, because it'll happen sooner or later.
Because it seems like the clock is ticking, it seems, because there's so many cracks with the existing system right now that if this is put off too long, that even if it was implemented, it's not going to have the impact that perhaps the positive impact that it should, but it's going to be more of a Band-Aid than a solution.
Well, I think there's pilots all being discussed in multiple places. Prince Edward Island is one that's really at the top there. There's huge support there for that being a next pilot. Manitoba is trying to get another pilot going there, and we've got Finland. There's big support there in Finland for it as well. There's a bunch of places discussing this, and as far as really getting something going, Canada is really especially impressive recently. Like the recent news with a group of mayors are going to get together and try to get that national conversation going there as well. And I just believe that the first country to do this is going to really see positive results, and other countries are going to want to follow suit. So it's really to see, it's like a race, who's going to be the first, and I'm sure that once that happens, we're going to see it really accelerate quickly. And things actually do go faster now these days as well. We've gay marriage went from where it was a decade ago to now Ireland being the first to democratically, grant those equal rights, and that was something where it would have taken longer before. Marijuana legalization here in the U.S. it's really working along fast, much more so than the past. And so I think we are looking at the ability for this to spread faster. So yeah, there's a race against the clock as far as technological unemployment and the effects of that go. But I think that we're in a good position to see things really accelerate quickly with basic income you know as soon as it's enacted somewhere.
Is there anything you would like to add, Ed?
Yeah, being an Irishman and being a supporter of gay rights and marriage equality, it was very interesting to see, that the vote happened just on the weekend, and it was overwhelming victory for the progressives of the country, and the country felt like we'd won the World Cup or something over the weekend. It was a great party. It was excellent. I was nursing a hangover on Sunday anyway, but I think when I think about there was a campaign in Ireland has very strict laws about equal airtime for yes and no sides, which it has its own problems. But it was interesting to note that the no side campaigners would often complain about the internet, and what they
Uh,
were doing was because let's face it, no pro-gay Twitter user is going to be called out and made a national or an international disgrace. That just isn't going to happen. And
no.
it seems that the internet is overwhelmingly, the articulate parts of the internet are overwhelmingly pro-gay rights and overwhelmingly, things like pro-drug legalization or decriminalization. And I think I heard a while ago one of the first blogs I read when I got into basic income was a guy, I can't remember his name right now, but he's interested in the technological side, and he was talking about how basic income can and should be the next great global political movement. And if you look at it, me and Scott are in different parts of the world, and yeah, we moderate this subreddit that's got people from all around the world, and I think the hopeful thing that's happening now is that more and more people are hearing about it worldwide and saying, this is a real solution. And I think in future that same consensus that was built up on the internet about gay rights can be built up about basic income, and it'll be that same kind of paradigm of those people that are connected to the world being for it, and the people who are against it being the more traditional conservative elements in society. Now, I don't want to compare the struggle we're having to the struggle for gay rights, because it isn't that. I think in the way the internet adopts an idea is definitely something we can be hopeful for trying to promote.
Yeah, it would be great for basic income to be more adoptable within the internet. I think it is happening because I see it's talked about in different places that I previously didn't think it would be talked about. And I think it's building, and I think it
Yeah,
really is just a reflection of a lot of different issues that are going on there, like climate change and how the environment is changing,
yeah,
everything. How, with the global collapse, you have the way the jobs are shifting, the amount of
mm,
debt individuals have, whether it be from the home or student loans or even the nature of war. People talk about how basic income could alleviate, in a sense, of war, where if people, you won't have these desperate people that you can send off to fight, and there won't be desperate people in nations they're going to want to fight. Uh,
yeah.
different things that are being kind of coming into this space and seeing it as a means, not necessarily the universal solution for everything, but as a means of a step forward.
Yeah, and that it's apolitical in a way.
It is very apolitical. It's
I
very
mean, as
human.
yeah, and I mean, I think there's a lot of youth that are so disenfranchised with politics, and like you say, this is a step forward that can be made, and it doesn't involve having to be ideological about something.
Yeah.
Yeah, the way I look at this too is that I look at it from a systems perspective, and people will say, oh, basic income is not a panacea or a silver bullet, or it's one step of many. But the thing about the basic income that's such a powerful idea is that it's a systemic change that allows and encourages and supports other systemic changes. So it creates this space where we can actually start to make these changes that are desperately needed and we really need to start doing. And we can't actually, there's no space to do that until we have basic income. And once we have basic income, then suddenly all these things open up. I look at it as a way of unlocking these doors. Like it's a way of, right now all these doors are locked, but with basic income, they're unlocked and we can start opening these things. And that's what we really need to start doing. That's why it's such a powerful idea.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. I go to a lot of other charity and NGO events. I kind of tongue in cheek say, there's a lot of causes that I care about, you know, and they're all around us. So many problems in the world, whether it's environment, or social, or involved in finance. And yes, I always say to them, well, what we'll do is we'll all get behind basic income first. And I'm sure they'd all love to say the same thing. Couldn't we solve my problem first, and then we'll get to yours? But I think, those that talk about change starts in yourself at first, and saying that, and you see people around the world that are willing to take a hit to their finances to work on community farms and things like that. And then when we think about, that we must try and have a new system and bring it in, part of it has to be on a level that's like, what do you want out of it, and what can you do to forward it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can see that, because I can see, like what you're saying, it lays down a foundation to, or a launching pad for other things. Because if
Mm-hmm.
you,
Yeah.
in essence, you can have, like, the higher ground is the best position to have if you play video games, and you can get at all the other places. But if you can't get to the higher ground first, or you can't get there, then you can't solve all these other problems or take out all the other bad guys.
Yeah,
It's just not going to happen. It's going to take longer.
yeah. Often it's just a case of,
Right.
instead of having to go and ask somebody, can I set up this community garden, or can I do this new thing? You've got some time and you've got some income to be able to do that. You can band together with a few people and set up a community organization that tries to solve a certain problem. And you can do that, whereas right now there are so many reasons that becomes an impossible cost, that basically the only people that end up doing that are people that are independently wealthy.
Well, then some of that is changing, because I've looked into that, where people are looking to do indoor things, and you're seeing, like, indoor gardens, and being able to put out the box that they used to be, like, in the cities. I had a friend that's grandmother used to live in New York, and they used to have, like, a flower box off their window, and they used to grow tomatoes off of it, and they had fresh tomatoes all the time, and that's what they did. And so people see a workaround solutions, and a lot of it, what it is I think what people are doing now is they're not asking permission anymore to do stuff. I mean, the reason why Uber exists is because they didn't ask permission to do what it's doing, or Airbnb. A lot of these community gardens, and even just with the organizations that exist on the internet in support of gay rights. If you think about a lot of the social issues or social communities that existed in the past, they kind of had to ask permission, in a sense, to do certain things or get the funding that they needed, or they themselves couldn't exist if they didn't work within that system. And a lot of people are saying, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to wait my turn. I'm not going to ask permission. I'm not going to play along. We're just going to do this, and either you're going to come along with us or just step out of our way.
Right. Yeah, and everybody should be empowered to do that and be able to make that choice. That's it really is. It's a very powerful aspect of basic income, is this ability to say no to it's important to say no to their jobs, to say no to employment as we classically know it. I don't think that people are going to be dropping out of the labor force left and right as some people fear. There's always work to do, and that's just it. Is that it allows you to choose the work that you want to do, and if that work is community activism, political activism, then you can choose that work, and you can live off of it. You can live, you can be free to do that. And until we make that possible, then there's so much of that that's not going on that otherwise would be. You
Or
know,
teaching. I mean, I've known a lot of people that used to be teachers for the simple fact that they could no
right?
longer
Too,
afford to
yeah,
teach.
yeah, not
But
enough
they would go
independent.
back, yeah, they would go back into that knowing that their basic essentials in life are taken care of. And think about how that would empower a society if they had the best thinkers teaching.
Well, yeah, and also, I mean, there's that, but it also, because basic income increases your bargaining power, then suddenly, you can be a teacher and you can be like, look, I really want to teach here, but I would prefer to earn, I'll do it for $40,000, and you can't really negotiate at that right now. You can only do that with teachers' unions, and these unions can actually be empowered through basic income too, but the biggest thing is just increased bargaining power. So if you want to do that, you have that ability, whereas before, you're afraid to make that negotiation. There's a funny part of a film that I think of that it reminds me of. It was it's Defending Your Life is what this movie was,
Hmm.
and at this one part, so he talks to his wife, and he's like, they're practicing about his interview the next day for a job, and he's like saying he's negotiating the salary, and he keeps during practice, he's like, no, I will not work for under $60,000 or whatever, and then he's like, are you no, 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 like this is my amount. I'm sorry, I refuse to work for under this amount. And then the next day, when he's actually there, then the guy offers him like $40,000, and without a single thought, he shakes his hand. He's like, "Done." Like he didn't say a thing. He was afraid. If you're afraid what's going to happen if you don't get your job, then you don't have that power. There's no bargaining power. But as soon as you don't need that job, then you can say stuff like, "I really want to work here, but I'm not going to work for under $40,000." And it's a strong difference than what we have right now.
Is there anything you'd like to add, Ed, before we wrap up?
Well, just the observation that I've been in that situation and I've realized I'm a terrible negotiator, which doesn't help. I mean, if you give people the ability to negotiate on fair terms, they're happier when they do come to a decision, you know? I mean,
Yeah.
there's a fair amount of people, although people shouldn't, the amount that they get paid has such a determinant on the way they think about their work that they're not earning quite what they think they should, and yet they don't see a way that they can change that, and so it just comes out in them hating their job.
Hmm.
I think another thing to mention here is imagine a world in which that person that you worked with that really hates their job and makes it awful for everybody else doesn't work there anymore. And
Right.
I'm sure there are cases whereby you work with an actual psycho and they still want to come in just to make everybody's life hell. But I'd say in most cases that person would leave that job and go to something else. Or at least if they don't, they can't really complain about it anymore, because the first
Right.
thing somebody's going to turn around and say is, well, you've got a basic income, go home and figure out what you want to do.
And the other part of that too is that that person can be replaced by someone who is currently unable to find a job who would love to work there. So not
Yeah.
only are you getting rid of somebody who hates working there and has horrible productivity, ruining the environment, and it's replaced by somebody who actually is a joy, loves the work and improves productivity, improves the environment. So there's not only the dropping of the negative, but there's a increasing of the positive as well.
Okay. Well, I think we pretty much covered everything about what basic income is, how cryptocurrency can help it, the different manners that people are seeking to implement it, and how it can benefit society. Why don't you, Scott and Ed, are there any means that people can communicate with you besides the subreddit you want to disclose, or any articles or anything like that you want people to perhaps read up on?
Yeah, I'm running my Patreon campaign. Check out patreon.com/Scott Santons. I'm crowdfunding my own basic income. A recent article in The Atlantic was written about me in that campaign, and I can send that link, and you can share that as well. And also, I just encourage people to check out basicincome.org just to learn more about it. That's like kind of the international news site, and basicincomeaction.org, which is the new central location for the growing basic income movement in the U.S.
And you, Ed?
Yeah, well, I would just say that if there are any European or Irish listeners, I'm a part of Basic Income Ireland. I'd encourage everybody, if they're interested in basic income, to look up if there's a local group. There's a lot of local basic income groups set up, and as you can see, this is a big conversation. It's really interesting conversation. There's so many facets to it. When I first got into basic income, a bit like Bitcoin, it's one of these ideas where I just had to apply it to every situation. I'm like, well, what does this change? How does this affect taxi driving, or all these different things? How did this affect automation? How does this affect polling and elections? And maybe it wouldn't affect everything, but it's an idea it's simple, yet it seems to have an interesting reflection on a lot of issues that we have nowadays. So I would encourage people to look up and see if they have a local basic income group. If they don't, to set one up if they're really interested. To come to the Basic Income subreddit and subscribe and take part in the discussions there, because it's pretty lively. And if they are in Ireland, or if they want to travel to Ireland, Basic Income Ireland are having a summer forum, and it is on the 22nd of June. And we have over as a guest speaker, we have Enno Schmidt and a man who I cannot remember his name right now, but they're both part of the Swiss basic income movement, and they're the guys who managed to get 100,000 signatures in Canton, I think they're called, in Switzerland, to be able to trigger the national referendum. I part of the inception of like you said earlier on about how it's gotten so much more popular in the last years, because those guys went forth and got that referendum initiated, and so that's been a huge story worldwide, and it'll be a big story when they vote on it. I think it's scheduled for the end of this year, but it's been changed once or twice, so I'm not sure when it is exactly.
The last update I saw, it was like 2016.
Yeah, it has to actually be by 2016, so it's not going to be later than that. So yeah, it just, the odds are it may end up being in 2016, and then there's the possibility that it might be into this year. But considering that the government of Switzerland is actually not favorable of the idea, they might probably push it off to as far as they can push it off to. So 2016 probably seems more likely.
Okay.
But even when it does happen, and I hope it happens this year, but when it does happen, I think it's going to be one of those watershed moments, because I think it's going to be something that people are going to talk about it as it leads up to it, and people are going to talk about the results of whichever way it lands, and I think it's going to bring that discussion at another next level, global level, because people are going to be more aware of it, because it's going to hit all the social media outlets. It's going to hit everything. And as more and more people talk about this, as they see an example that they can lay their eyes on, I think it's going to increase the discussion of basic income.
Oh, sure. Definitely.
I hope so.
Yeah. Well, all right. Well, thanks for having us.
Well, thank you for coming on. Again, guys, this is Scott and Ed. They are the moderators of our Basic Income. This is Hero Job Shibe. I hope you guys enjoyed our discussion, and I will speak to you another time. To the moon.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
So I'm going to be editing this a little bit.
Okay.
On the YouTube, put it on Reddit, and then the audio portion will be on the podcast, which will come out tomorrow. And I'll send you guys those links.
Okay, great.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
All right. And I'll probably email you both just to make sure the about section is right, if there's any additional information you guys want to add.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Especially like your Patreon, Scott, so people can click on and support.
Great, thanks.
All right. And Ed, for you, any paper or any information, like your research stuff that maybe someone can help you with, or you want to bring it out? Yeah.
I will. Yeah, that'd be cool. In fact, Yeah, I will send just a short text on that, and
Mm-hmm.
when I have a look at it, and I'm just going to send you the link now to the that's it there. Should
Okay.
be to the newsletter where you announced the summer forum for Basic
Okay.
Income Ireland.
All right. Well, again, thank you so much, guys. This is a lot of fun. I learned so much because you've cleared up a lot of the confusion I've had with this subject, and
Great.
I appreciate you guys speaking to me about this.
No problem. Thanks a
Excellent.
lot.
Thank
It's
you.
always a pleasure.
Thank
Yeah.
you,
Thanks.
and you guys have a
Bye
great
bye.
day.
You too.
Absolutely.
Take
And
care.
even for you, Ed.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah.
Bye
I'm
Good night,
slowly
bye.
recovering.
Ed.
See you later, guys. Bye
See you
bye.
later. Bye.
Nice one.
Okay.